They called it a marriage. But it was anything but love. A Roman emperor, drunk with power, took a boy, just a child, and paraded him through the empire as his wife. But behind the silk veils and golden robes, the truth was darker than fiction. These are the 10 shocking secrets Rome tried to erase. About the boy Nero married. Stay with us until the end, because what happened to him was buried for centuries. Secret number 1. Nero didn't fall in love, he hunted a replacement for the wife he murdered. In 65 AD, Empress Poppaea Sabina died under mysterious circumstances. The official stories were vague, but even Roman historians, men used to violence, winced at the rumors. Some claimed Nero kicked her in the stomach while she was pregnant. Others whispered she was poisoned. What's not disputed is this: she died at his hands. But Nero wasn't grieving. He was searching. He missed Poppaea's beauty, her elegance, her presence in the palace. But more than that, he missed what she represented, a reflection of his own power and divinity. So when he saw a boy among the imperial slaves, a boy with large dark eyes and a face uncannily like hers, something in Nero clicked. And the hunt began. The boy's name is lost to history. What we do know is the name Nero gave him, Sporus. But Sporus wasn't a name. It was a word used for neutered creatures, a cruel, dehumanizing label. He was likely no older than 13 or 14. Delicate, effeminate, beautiful, and vulnerable. In Roman culture, boys were often objectified, especially in aristocratic households. But this was different. Nero wasn't looking for a servant. He wanted a living replica, a ghost of Poppaea, a boy to mold into the wife he destroyed. The selection wasn't random. It was intentional. Nero had him brought forward, examined, likely washed, oiled, clothed in soft fabrics, tested for compliance. The boy had no father to protect him, no voice in the matter. He was told he would live in the palace, that he would wear gold, be treated with honor. But the truth was unspeakable. He wasn't being adopted. He was being prepared. What makes this the first shocking secret isn't just that Nero selected a boy for marriage. It's why he did it. Nero wasn't in love. He was obsessed with himself, with the legacy of Poppaea, with recreating the illusion of control. And when the Roman Senate found out, they did nothing. Because Nero was the emperor. Because fear silenced every tongue. Because no one wanted to be next. The boy was chosen. The world looked away. And the empire once again chose spectacle over justice. Secret number 2. Rome didn't just allow Nero to mutilate a child, it celebrated it. After selecting the boy he would call Sporus, Nero did not wait. There was no public discussion. No imperial debate. No one dared to speak against what was about to happen. Because Nero had power. Absolute power. And so he used it. The boy, still unnamed in history, still barely in adolescence, was taken to a private chamber in the imperial palace. There, surrounded by perfumed cloth and gilded walls, he was physically altered to fit Nero's vision. He was castrated. This wasn't uncommon in Rome. Eunuchs existed, mostly in eastern provinces. But for a Roman citizen, especially a child, this was a violation of the unspoken limits of cruelty. Castration was brutal, permanent, and often fatal due to infection or blood loss. But Nero didn't care. Because this wasn't about the boy. It was about Poppaea. And Nero wanted her back, even if he had to carve her likeness into someone else's skin. No records detail how the boy reacted. No accounts tell us if he screamed or if he passed out from the pain. But historians agree, he survived. And that made him even more valuable to Nero. Once the wounds healed, the emperor began the second phase of transformation. He dressed the boy in Poppaea's gowns. He had his hair styled like hers. He taught him to walk like her, to speak softly like her, to move as she once did. He was no longer allowed to be a boy. He was a living effigy, a replica, a fantasy with a pulse. Nero did not hide this. In fact, he bragged about it. He invited officials to court and presented the boy, veiled and dressed in bridal silks, as if introducing his new empress. He referred to him publicly as Poppaea, and demanded everyone else do the same. The people of Rome? They laughed nervously. Or they whispered behind closed doors. Or they cheered, because they had learned it was safer to laugh with the monster than cry for his victims. But the most disturbing part of this secret? Rome accepted it. The Senate didn't stop it. The priests didn't object. The nobleman who saw the boy in his golden veil didn't rise to protect him. Because Rome had become a stage and Nero its playwright. And in this twisted play, the boy was just a prop. Secret number 2 is not just about the act of castration. It's about the world that allowed it. the empire that applauded it. And the boy who bled quietly beneath the silks of a dead woman. The empire didn't care if he lived. It only cared if he looked the part. Secret number 3. Nero staged a full imperial wedding, except the bride was a mutilated boy. Once the boy had healed from the brutal surgery, Nero was ready to make the illusion permanent. He would not simply dress the child in silks and parade him in court. He would marry him. And not in secret. Not in whispers. In front of Rome. The ceremony was planned meticulously. Witnesses recorded every disturbing detail. The boy, now referred to only as Sporus, was adorned like a Roman bride. He wore a bridal veil, the flammeum, dyed deep orange. His hair was styled in 6 elaborate braids, a traditional arrangement for noblewomen. Around his neck, a necklace of pearls. On his feet, gold-stitched sandals. And on his face, silence. Because in Roman weddings, the bride was to be modest, submissive, quiet. Sporus had no lines in this ceremony. Only a role. Nero, in his ceremonial robes, led the boy through the rites. They stood before the high priest. Sacrifices were made. Vows were spoken. And then, a ring was placed on the boy's finger. The crowd looked on. Some laughed nervously. Others applauded. Most said nothing, because saying something meant questioning Nero. And questioning Nero meant death. Why did he do it? Nero claimed that he had seen Poppaea's soul reincarnated in Sporus. That she had returned to him through this boy's body. But everyone knew the truth. This was power as theater. A cruel pageant. And the boy? He became a symbol. Not of love. Not of healing. But of how far an emperor could go, and how far an empire would follow. After the ceremony, Nero took Sporus on his imperial tour of Greece. Everywhere they went, Sporus was introduced as the Empress. He sat beside Nero in the royal carriage. He walked behind him in processions. He was kissed in public. At night they shared a bed. Some say Sporus was forced to speak in a high-pitched voice to match the memory of Poppaea. Others say he remained eerily silent, like a shadow with no will of its own. But what no one says, what no one can say, is how he truly felt. Because his words were never written. He was not asked. He was not free. He was a bride made of grief and gold, led down an aisle paved with silence. Secret number 3 is not about the wedding itself. It's about the emptiness of spectacle. The horror of applause. The child made to smile as Rome clapped for his chains. And the question Rome never dared ask. What does it mean when a boy's suffering becomes a festival? Secret number 4. They called him Empress. But he lived like a prisoner in silk. After the wedding, the boy the world called Sporus was no longer treated like a child. He was treated like a role. A position. An accessory. A living ghost. He now slept in Nero's chambers. Dined at Nero's side. Stood behind him during ceremonies, veiled and painted like Poppaea had once been. But what seemed like luxury was, in truth, a gilded prison. He couldn't leave the palace without permission. He couldn't speak out of turn. He couldn't show grief or confusion or fear. Because that wasn't what Poppaea would do. Nero didn't want a person. He wanted a mirror. Someone to reflect his delusion. And Sporus had no choice but to obey. Inside the palace, his days were strictly controlled. He was bathed by attendants, dressed by slaves, and watched constantly. The guards weren't there for his safety. They were there to keep him in place. To ensure the illusion remained perfect. When Nero hosted parties, Sporus was expected to appear, always flawless. Guests were expected to treat him as the Empress. And anyone who didn't? They disappeared. Some accounts say Nero would lead Sporus by the hand into banquets and call him, "My dear Poppaea." Others report that he would force him to dance, entertain, and even bless guests in ceremonial fashion. But none of it was real. Behind the veils, behind the gold, was a mutilated boy forced into a dead woman's skin. Worse still, Sporus became a symbol for Rome's decay. Poets mocked him. Gossipers whispered about the emperor and his eunuch bride. But no one spoke of his pain. Not publicly. Because the empire had no language for what was happening. There was no term for what Nero had done. No laws to stop it. No forum to protest it. And so the boy remained where he was. Trapped in splendor. Suffocating in robes. And utterly alone. There's a line in one Roman satire that hints at what Sporus endured. He glows like Poppaea, but his eyes betray another fire, a fire that does not warm. It's the only surviving clue that someone somewhere might have seen past the costume. That someone saw the child still trapped inside. But the fire they saw? It wasn't rebellion. It was grief. Secret number 4 isn't just about the illusion. It's about the cost of playing a role you never chose. It's about being buried alive in someone else's identity, and being told to smile while the empire watches. Secret number 5. The boy outlived Nero, but never escaped him. In 68 AD, Nero's world collapsed. The Senate turned against him. The people mocked him openly. His guards deserted. Facing execution, Nero fled Rome, hiding in a villa on the outskirts. There, trembling and paranoid, he pressed a blade to his throat and whispered, "What an artist dies in me." Then he killed himself. The tyrant was dead. But Sporus was not free. He had survived Nero. But now he belonged to the empire again. The new emperor, Otho, had once been Poppaea's husband, before Nero took her. So when Otho took power, he claimed Sporus too. To some, it was revenge. To others, obsession. But what's certain is this. Sporus became a trophy once again. Otho kept him by his side. He dressed him like a woman, paraded him through Rome, and forced him to reenact the role Nero had created. One emperor was gone. But the performance continued. The boy had become more than just a person. He was a spectacle, a strange, tragic reminder of imperial madness. And the empire, sick with violence and power, fed on it. Sporus wasn't allowed to fade into the background. He was passed along like an artifact. After Otho came Vitellius, a brutal military commander who seized control of Rome during civil unrest. And once again, Sporus was taken. Vitellius had no interest in love or illusion. He used Sporus as entertainment. He planned a public performance, a mock wedding between Sporus and a slave man, to be held in the arena before thousands. It was meant to be satire, to mock Nero, to shame the memory of Poppaea, to humiliate Sporus beyond recovery. But Sporus had endured enough. Before the performance could take place, he found a blade. And for the first time, he made a choice. He took his own life. Quietly. Alone. Without ceremony. He had survived Nero, Otho, and Vitellius. But not Rome. Secret number 5 isn't just that Sporus was abused after Nero. It's that his suffering became a ritual. A joke in the hands of emperors. A weapon to wield against memories and enemies. Even in death, he was not granted dignity. No tomb. No shrine. No inscription. He vanished from history like a shadow at dusk. There's something uniquely Roman about what happened to Sporus. A civilization obsessed with gods and glory, but unwilling to see the horror they wrapped in gold. The boy outlived an emperor, but he never outlived his story. Secret number 6. Before he died, Rome planned to make him the center of a public execution, disguised as theater. By the time Vitellius seized power in 69 AD, the Roman Empire was bleeding from civil war. Blood spilled across the streets. Soldiers loyal to different emperors clashed. Families turned on each other. Chaos reigned. But in the middle of that chaos, Rome still made time for spectacle. And Vitellius, cruel, theatrical, and gluttonous, planned something horrifying. He announced that Sporus, the boy who had once been Nero's bride, would star in a public performance at the Colosseum. The theme? The myth of Proserpina. In Roman legend, Proserpina was abducted by the god of the underworld. She screamed for help, dragged beneath the earth, her cries unanswered. The myth symbolized seasons, death, rebirth. But Vitellius saw it as something else. Entertainment. Sporus was to be dressed as Proserpina, paraded before the crowd, and then violently violated and killed by a trained actor playing Pluto. The act would be simulated for theater, but everyone knew the truth. It would be a staged rape and execution wrapped in myth with a real victim. Rome would cheer. The nobles would laugh. And Sporus would die as he had lived, as a symbol for someone else's power. But something broke inside him. He had endured castration. He had endured the wedding, the parading, the whispers, the ridicule, the violations. But this final humiliation? He refused. And in a moment of rare agency, he chose death on his own terms. We don't know exactly how he did it. Ancient sources only say that he took his own life before the performance could take place. He vanished behind closed doors. No screams. No applause. No crowd. Just silence. Secret number 6 is not just about a death. It's about the empire's addiction to pain. Its ability to turn suffering into ceremony. Rome, a city that prided itself on law and civilization, was prepared to stage a live execution of a broken boy as entertainment. And no one stopped it. Because he wasn't Sporus. Not to them. He was the echo of Nero's madness. A ghost of a ghost. An object. But to us, he was a boy. With a name no one recorded. with pain no one wrote down, with a soul that deserved peace. His final act was not performance. It was resistance. And it may be the only moment in his entire life he truly owned. Secret number 7. The boy who became Nero's wife died without his name ever being remembered. History calls him Sporus. But that wasn't his real name. It wasn't the name his mother whispered when he was born. It wasn't the name his friends called out on the streets as they played. It wasn't the name he used before Nero found him. Sporus is not a name at all. It means seed in Greek. Or more specifically, castrated one. It was a label. A brand. A cold reminder of what had been taken from him. And so the final truth, the one most haunting of all, is this. We don't even know who he really was. Ancient Rome recorded the names of generals, tyrants, poets, and gods. But the boy who was dragged into the emperor's bed, carved into the shape of a dead woman, and forced to live out a public tragedy, his name was not considered important enough to preserve. And yet, his silence echoes through history. Because Sporus was more than Nero's puppet. He was a mirror of the empire's worst urges. Through him we see how power corrupts beauty. How love becomes possession. How innocence can be stolen, dressed in jewels, and paraded until it forgets it was ever human. After his suicide, Sporus vanished from the record. There were no statues. No epitaphs. No prayers. Just a dark smear in the footnotes of Rome's golden age. But even there, in those footnotes, his shadow remains. Some scholars argue that Nero genuinely loved him. That in his twisted grief for Poppaea, he sought to recreate what he had lost. But love built on violence isn't love. It's control. Obsession. Madness. And Rome watched it all. Applauded it. Feared it. Then forgot it. Today, Sporus has become something else. A symbol not of scandal, but of the forgotten. Of all those erased from the scrolls of history because they had no power, no voice, no name the empire found worth writing. He represents the thousands of children who suffered behind marble walls. The truth that even the most powerful empires are built on the backs of the powerless. There's one last cruel irony. Centuries after his death, artists, writers, and even Hollywood have romanticized Nero's story, dramatized the madness, dressed it in robes and gold again. But Sporus? He's almost always left out. Because telling his story forces us to face the cruelty behind the beauty. To question what we choose to celebrate. To ask what we're still willing to ignore. And so this final secret isn't just about a boy. It's about how we remember pain. Or how we choose not to. If you've listened this far, you now know the truth that Rome tried to erase. The boy Nero married never had a voice. But now you've heard it. Let's make sure he's never forgotten again. If this story moved you, share it, subscribe, and help us bring light to the corners of history that were never meant to be seen. Because sometimes, the smallest names carry the loudest echoes.